Graffiti is a habit-forming behavior, and anybody that's ever felt what you feel when you hit up is likely to want to do it again. This was definitely the case for me, and as soon as I started tagging, I found myself on a mission to get up every single day. But what does your life start looking like when you're on a mission like this and you achieve it? And being unable to speak to anybody else's experience, this is what it looked like for me when I started hitting up daily. And in talking about living this kind of lifestyle, I think it's appropriate to start with how I prepared myself every day before I went out and bombed. And generally speaking, any preparations for that day started the night before. And considering that I was a bus hopper, this meant that I was usually pulling together a bunch of different markers, maybe a streaker here and there, and any stickers that I wanted to use the next day, I usually had those done before I went to sleep. I would keep these stickers and the Sharpies that I would use with them in the house, but for most of my other stuff, I kept them stashed outside. By the time I was tagging, I was the main guy walking our dog Spike, and rest in peace to the homeboy Spike. Spike was very aggressive. He would attack anybody without any kind of prompting, and we really couldn't bring him around anybody. Dogs, cats, other people, nothing. This meant that we had to walk Spike very early in the morning or very late at night. And if it was the latter, it was usually me. And when I'd be out there, I'd grab some of the stuff I needed for the next day. And my days during the week would follow a pretty typical routine. I get up in the morning, I get myself ready, I might eat something, I throw on my backpack, I go outside, jump on the bus, and by like maybe 8:30 that morning, I already had a tag running. And even though I didn't recognize it at the time, hitting buses was hot. And some of you guys might wonder how I mentally prepared myself to go out there and do something hot every single day. And for your average person that's just in the mix tagging, I would figure by maybe 1 month or 2 months deep into tagging every day, this pre-tag anxiety that some people have will be gone. But I have to figure, because personally, I never felt any. That's not to say I never felt any anxiety or I never felt any fear just going about my life in the late 90s. I felt tons of both all the time. But when it came to tagging, all I ever felt was anticipation or joy. But on my daily quest to get up, where was I usually going? And usually I was either going to or from school on the bus or on the train. And no matter what school I was going to or what bus or train I took to get there, during my time as an active rider, usually I was going to school with other riders. And although some of us have been taking some of these bus lines and train lines from before we started tagging, we came to look at them in a different way and understand these routes a little bit better once we started riding. And pretty early on to learning any new bus route, you would find the places along the route that were very advantageous to you as a rider. And the places along the bus route that we found to be the most advantageous were places where the bus would have to take very sharp turns. A bus might only be turning like this for a couple of seconds, but some of these turns were sharp enough that the driver would be completely out of view. And just that couple of seconds, we knew it was coming. After riding that bus line every single day, we waited for those moments to come, and as soon as they were there, we got up. I can also add that I usually sat in the exact same place most days. And my favorite spot to be at on a bus when I was riding was all the way in the back, usually in the back row of the bus on the left-hand side. Being right-handed, this meant that I could just tag right across my body, and this always felt more comfortable to do versus tagging on the right side with my right hand. And if a bus driver was on me, if they were staring at me and there wasn't so much I could do, sitting this way also made it easier to hit scriber shots. I could lean up against that window, I could put my left arm up, and I could put my right arm underneath it and just bust a quick scribe tag. And if the driver wasn't on me too tough, but maybe there was other people around that looked like heroes and I didn't want to bust out an ultra or a pilot, I could do the same kind of thing, but move a lot slower and really dig in with that scriber. And sometimes I would hit up maybe 5 to 10 minutes for each letter. And if I busted a scribe like this, they weren't buffing that thing without replacing the whole window. But scribing aside, you could do a lot of other damage from this seat on the bus. And from this same seat, I could also hit a panel, I could hit the back panel, and I could even stand up and hit the ceiling. But whether I was going to school or coming home from it, tagging on a bus was pretty much the same experience across the board. At either time of the day, the bus was usually packed and you usually had a good amount of cover to block you from the bus driver when you were tagging. And generally speaking, I found better conditions to bomb in the morning time, but I probably caught as many tags in the afternoon as I did in the morning. I can also say I wasn't out there just hitting buses, I also hit the streets. But when, how, and where I hit the streets really differs depending on the timeline in my life that we're discussing. For the first 8 or 9 months that I was riding, the main dude that I tagged with was the homeboy E. But I can say after school, we usually went our separate ways. He went over to Richland, I went over to Cortland. And if we wanted to hit something other than buses, or even just hit different buses, like go and bus hop in a different neighborhood, this is something that we would have to plan out a few days in advance, and it always took place during the week. My mom was usually the first person to get home, and she expected me to be home at a certain time, and if I didn't show up at that time, she'd be very worried. So if I wanted to go out and hit up in different places, I was still gonna have to be home at the usual time and play it off like I just went to school. And on one of these days that we'd have one of these missions planned out, we'd link up at lunchtime and we'd sneak right out, jump on the first bus that we could and just get out of the area, and sometimes just bus hop away from the area, then head where we were going. And once we were on foot somewhere, especially away from our neighborhoods and away from our schools, as we were proceeding to our destination, we'd be tagging all along the way. When me and the homeboy E would be on a mission like this, we usually just had markers and rarely ever had cans. And since we'd usually be on missions like this in the afternoon when fools were working, almost nobody would be out there with us. Cutting school like this with the homeboy E usually meant going out to Daly City, going out and getting some more markers, some more supplies, and generally speaking, going somewhere that was far away from both Bernal Heights and the mission. On weekends, I pretty much lived at this fool's house and was basically a member of his family. And you would figure because we were together, we were both super dedicated to getting up, on a weekend, we could go out and do our thing even more. But to be honest, it wasn't like that. And usually on a weekend, we'd just be around the way in Bernal Heights. We almost never bus hopped on the weekends, and if we were gonna catch any tags on buses, it was usually buses that were parked on the street and the bus driver was slipping. If we did feel like tagging, we were usually on our bikes, and that made it really easy to pull up to a spot, hit up real quick, and get away. And it made it even easier to get away from the fools that were out there robbing. But weekends for us, generally speaking, were a lot more mellow. That might be the time when we link up with other riders and just talk about what was going on, talk about pushing our crew or pushing ourselves a little further. We'd listen to a gang at E40 and spend all day practicing our tags. By nighttime, both of us were expected to be in the house, but sneaking out of that house on a Saturday night was very complicated. And when we finally figured out a way to do it, it took us weeks to get those preparations right, to line everything up, and we were only able to do this one time before we fell out. By the time I started high school, things switched up. At high school, I met the homeboy K, who only lived like 2 blocks away. And starting in high school, I would go home, I'd drop my stuff off, I'd say what's up to my mom, and let her know that me and the homeboy K would just be kicking it outside. Just like with the homeboy E, we'd usually be on our bikes, and we hit a lot of cuts in the neighborhood and catch tags. But also in 9th grade, I started cutting school a lot more. The homeboy K and I would also tag en route to wherever we were going, whether it was going to a bonfire, a party at somebody's house, or just to kick it with some people. But many times when we were going somewhere, we were tagging along the way, but we had no destination in mind. Unlike with the homeboy E, I didn't really kick it with the homeboy K on the weekends. And by the middle part of 1997, I was spending a lot of time out in the East Bay, particularly in Berkeley. Anytime I was out there with the homeboy D, we'd usually be on the streets at nighttime, and just like in San Francisco, there was plenty of stuff out there to tag on in the streets in Berkeley, and while you had to be careful, especially where this fool lived, really, you never saw anybody out there at nighttime, and it was pretty easy to do your thing. I'm fairly sure that during my time as a rider out in Berkeley, I got up at Gilman Street. For you guys that don't know, this is a very famous venue in punk rock history, but it got tagged up a lot, and I was far from the only person to ever hit up there. And by the end of my time as a rider, if I was going anywhere, I was usually tagging along the way, and if I was on a bus, that bus was getting hit up. Really, the only time I wouldn't tag is if I was with a family member, but tagging became an everyday part of my life and stayed that way until I stopped riding. But what was the impact of getting up every day on my life? And I can say there's a couple of ways to gauge this. First is how it impacted me as a rider. Graffiti writers need to be constantly honing their skills and practicing to develop. And in my opinion, there's no better practice than the real thing, and I constantly practice. tagging every day also meant other writers saw me up, and other writers that I respected saw me up especially, and getting props from them meant a lot. This also led me to join a crew that I respected very much called NBK, and I was only able to join NBK because the homeboy Sin saw me up so much. But possibly the thing that I cherish the most is that people that I respected very much still remember me, still told me that they saw me up and they remembered seeing me running years after I was done tagging. But as Connor McCann, the human being, and not necessarily Harm One, the writer, how did doing all this impact me personally? And I can say by the later stages of my time as a writer, graff had completely consumed my life. By this point in my life, I could get on a bus by myself with nobody else and take a seat. And when I looked up at the driver, I would see them staring at me. And any bus driver that had been on the job for more than a couple of weeks could look at me and tell that I obviously wrote. I was dressing the part, I definitely wore my backpack accordingly, and just the little behavioral cues that I gave off told drivers that I was up to something. And when faced with this kind of behavior from a bus driver, I would react defiantly. Sometimes it was as little as just mean mugging the person back, but other times when I'd be getting off the bus, I would hit up and make sure they saw me. And given that during the time that I wrote, I got caught a few times on buses, I got grabbed by a hero before, I had another hero also tell me that they were going to take my life, it makes sense if I develop some healthy paranoia. I can't really say that this hypervigilance ever helped me out. I still ended up getting caught, I still ended up getting banned from a bus line and having beef with the bus driver, and really all this did was make me more tense and more reactive when something happened. But this paranoia aside, the biggest changes that I experienced were to my personality and to my social life. When I first started tagging, I had a lot of different interests, and I was especially interested in playing basketball. And at the start of 8th and 9th grade, I was committed to getting good grades, or at least good enough grades, to be able to play basketball, and I was really trying to stay out of trouble. But not making the team either year killed off my interest in basketball, and it killed off my interest in school. But to be real with you guys, I didn't have a lot of interest in school anyway. And once I was done playing basketball, my only real hobby or interest outside of graff was punk rock. But the punk rock scene felt exactly the same as the graff scene, and a lot of people were involved in both. And by the middle part of 1998, if you encountered me, you were encountering somebody who pretty much only talked about graff, who used graff slang constantly, and used graff slang constantly even to non-writers. And in terms of the people I kicked it with during this time, pretty much all of them all wrote. But in retrospect, being a very active tagger meant that anybody that wasn't a very active tagger, even the fools that just kind of tagged here and there, didn't want to be around us. They didn't want to be around the problems we caused. They didn't want to get banned from bus lines. They didn't want to have hero danger. So they would see us, they kick it with us at school, it'd be all good. But when it was time to go and get up, they were nowhere to be found. Some of these people that I was cool with at school, but not necessarily outside of it, became cool with me and kicked it with me when I was done writing. And it wasn't until I stopped writing that I developed some interest in other things. I had other things to talk about, or I even developed a personality outside of graff. And when I look back on this time, I can look at some of the stuff I did and some of the situations I found myself in and say, guess what, Connor? You were bugging, you were tripping, but I don't regret a moment of it. And I'm thankful to have gone on the run that I did when I did versus trying to go on one now with everything that comes with it.